Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man's channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So for this video I am talking about albums which I consider as rejected children. So what do I mean by that? What on earth do I mean that an album is comparable to a rejected child? Well, it's those albums that are actually generally disliked by the band or the artist that created them. You know, they're the ill-favoured ones in their discography, the ones that the band don't take pride in looking back at. And some of you might think, well, it's a little bit like the Is It That Bad series that Chill Dude runs, where you have the albums that tend to be the ones that are less popular, being up for contention for us asking whether or not those albums are in fact that bad. So this is a similar sort of thing, but it's one where I've managed to find either in an interview or an article, or I've tried to research whether these albums are actually genuinely disliked by, you know, any one of the band members or even ex-band members that were involved in the band, and have come to the conclusion. I think 4 out of these 5 albums definitely fit that category. One I'm a bit less sure about. It seems a bit of a grey area, but it's an album I've listened to a lot recently that I feel like is still somewhat a rejected child anyway. Whether or not the artist dislikes that album, I'm not 100% sure, but I thought I'd include it because it's kind of guilty pleasure. It's kind of this sort of an album, and it fits, I think it just about fits in this list, despite that uncertainty about whether the artist themselves actually dislikes it. So let's start with my first choice for this list, which is Iron Maiden's No Prayer for the Dying from 1990. And this is one of those albums that I thought came after an impeccable run from Maiden. I mean, their 80s albums are, for me, of their best, and back-to-back 1980s releases from this band were just absolutely, you know, pretty much impeccable. And so you follow up with an album which is a bit different. It's shorter, it's concise, perhaps a little bit poppier, and shorter tracks than what they'd done on previous albums like Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, maybe Power Slave as well, you know, the more progressive styled albums. This one was suddenly like, you know, the band, a lot of people felt the band rushed this album, didn't really put as much thought into it, and it was just generally weaker songs on here. Now, I do somewhat agree with those criticisms. However, I still get a lot of enjoyment out of this album, and I still kind of love it. I still really enjoy opening track Tailgunner. I really love the lead guitar part in Run Silent, Run Deep. I thoroughly enjoy just the thrill of listening into Hook Seeing You and the catchiness of that Bruce Dickinson chorus, and just kind of get a lot of enjoyment out of that as well. And also tracks like, you know, Assassin and Holy Smoke and Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter is just a good laugh. It's not to be taken too seriously. And I think that's the problem with this album, was that some Maiden fans just tend to take it a bit too seriously, and they're moving into the sort of Fear of the Dark era a bit more as well, I think, with this record, and you can sort of hear that a touch. Just going a bit more commercial maybe, and I really just kind of enjoy what they do here. It's not really necessarily anything quite like the standard we had before with epic Iron Maiden 80s releases, but it's still good fun. And at the end of the day, sometimes you just want something that's like a fizzy drink or a bit of fast food, a fast food meal, and it just does the job for you there and then. No Prayer for the Dying fits that category easily, despite it being a rejected child. One of those albums that I'm aware the band aren't particularly keen on either when they look back. Next up, I'm talking about Korn and Take a Look in the Mirror. And I'm going to put on the screen some ratings for this album that I got from Wikipedia, and you can see it's not a well-liked album as it is. Also, Brian Welch doesn't like this record. He named it apparently his least favourite album, as did Jonathan Davidson in 2015 ranking anyway, is what I found out about this one. But here we go again. It's another album that, despite all that, you know, despite all the criticism I have a lot of time for, I just get almost a bit of a guilty pleasure type of album again. You know, it's just a fun time. The tracks hit hard though. You know, the sound on this record is a really heavy hitting Korn production. You just hear, like, as with other Korn records, Fieldy's bass just has that kind of clicking sound, which I kind of like. And I really enjoy just the heaviness of this album. Yes, the tracks are fairly simplistic, a couple which are perhaps a bit almost too repetitive and annoying even for my liking on here, but I still dig this record. I loved It My Time, the song that has the sort of Tomb Raider video with Angelina Jolie, and that's a cracking song with a fantastic breakdown. Heavy as all hell. I really, really enjoy Right Now. That riff at the start of the album is just a classic Korn guitar riff, and that bass sound is just huge. And it's just a rollicking ride. I just enjoy Take a Look in the Mirror, and I know it's not popular as such, or not as popular as a lot of other Korn's records, but I don't really care. Like with the last album, No Prayer for the Dying, it just hits the spot. It's the fix. It's just like sometimes you just want that quick fix of an album, and it's exactly what Take a Look in the Mirror does. It's just an enjoyable, cheesy record. And next up, I'm talking about Megadeth, The World Needs a Hero. And in this one, it's a former band member, I believe Marty Friedman, that has said that he was a little bit disappointed by this album. And I believe it's not particularly looked at fondly necessarily by Megadeth and former band members of Megadeth. So it sort of fits this. And fans, generally don't really like The World Needs a Hero, although I think the consensus is probably it's a little bit better than predecessor Risk. So, it's again one of these records, although this one's instrumentally I think quite impressive, although it's sort of like I feel like a bit like they were trying to regurgitate the style of Rust in Peace sometimes and just not really pulling it off. It's not nearly as technically tight for me or as ambitious as Rust in Peace, but you can hear moments where they're trying. You can feel like Dave and Co are trying to bring back some of that sound here on this album. I really enjoy 1,000 Times Goodbye, Recipe for Hate, Warhorse, Dread and the Fugitive Mind, and it was Al Pitrelli's first album on guitar as well, as I understand it. And I think it's just, it's just fun. Again, I like some of the riffs on this record. And again, it's an album which a lot of these records come later in these bands' discographies, like they're an album 6, 7, 8, or 9. So it's usually when you get towards the band tends to either be past what a lot of people would consider their best, but it doesn't mean they can't come up with something which is still good or fun or entertaining. And I think The World Needs a Hero is still, it's kind of fun. Next up, I'm talking about another album which is disliked by the frontman in this case, by the man himself, Ozzy Osbourne, and The Ultimate Sin. I won't talk too much about this album. I did a whole Dark Horse Discs episode on it a couple of years ago, talking about this album with JC Rock and Metal Reviews and Shielded on a Couch Reviews. And we were generally in agreement, as I remember, that The Ultimate Sin by Ozzy Osbourne is a bit of a dark horse. And it has lots of great tracks. This is another one of those albums that's very catchy. It for me feels like you can feel the impact of the glam era on that record, at least certainly aesthetically. I remember how Ozzy looks back then, and that it was that whole 80s glam thing going on appearance wise. Whilst the songs themselves are still pretty rocking and still pretty heavy, and perhaps heavier than you get from the cold glam scene of that time, it kind of has that feel and style of it just a little bit for me, as well as just having fantastic guitar work from Mr. J.K. Lee. I mean, I love his playing on tracks like Never Know Why, and I think Killer of Giants is one of Ozzy's best slower ballad type songs. Also, I have a lot of time for Shot in the Dark, a single on this record. I love the video for that album. It just kind of gives the whole glamorous and thrill of that time period of the 1980s, where there's just a lot of there's a sort of real carefree attitude about the whole captures that time really well, and that song just sort of also gives me that kind of 80s nostalgia and thrill of that time. And I think Shot in the Dark is just really expedites that brilliantly. Lastly on my list is the one that doesn't really quite fit in the list quite as well, because I'm not aware of Alice Cooper. I don't think anyway that he necessarily dislikes this record. It was actually a bit of a comeback album for him. That's the album Constrictor, but it's more that this album is certainly, I think, gets ranked generally quite low in rankings for a start by fans and critics. And yeah, it was generally not well received when this came out, this Constrictor album from 1986, which was the beginning of Alice Cooper's glam era for me. You had albums like Trash and Hey Stupid coming out in this sort of, this relatively short, but for me, very memorable era of albums from him, where you have some really fun and again, catchy, yes, a little cheesy at times, but they're songs that, they raise the roof, they're anthemic, they're great for parties, they're good fun. And as I said, with No Prayer for the Dying, Take a Look in the Mirror, The World Needs a Hero, and The Ultimate Sin, they just hit the spot. These are just albums that, they're not necessarily super technical, avant-garde, all this other stuff, which generally, a lot of reviewers need to give super high scores. These are just straight up entertaining, fun, easy to listen to albums that I don't necessarily think that makes them bad albums. And that's the note I'm going to finish on here. Let me know what you guys think of these records. Are you also in the camp that gets a certain amount of pleasure out of them like I do, with shame or without shame? So until next time, hope you enjoy the video. Don't forget to drop a like and a subscribe if you're new to the channel. Otherwise, from me, until next time, it's bye for now.